Hello and welcome. I am Scrapperlock, and this is City of Heroes on the Rebirth server. We are with our level 47 Brute Quintessence class, who has 27 million experience earned with 2.5 million to go to get to level 48. Our next set of enhancement slots, 53 million experience, and we're on a story arc for Unai Kemen, who says we've got a tense situation. Quintessence class. Wait, no, we've got. Sorry, reading the wrong one. Most of the time, the story arc one is down here, but this time it's up top. Portal Corporation is extremely grateful to you for rescuing those scientists. I just wish we knew what was wrong with them. They're still speaking nothing but gibberish. We send them over to Dr. Stephen Sheridan. Will you go and collect the results? So we're going to go collect results from Steve Sheridan. And that means we're going to head to BRICKSTOWN. In fact, I think I'm going to just OUROBOROS my way there. Just because Peregrine Island is just going to be a long hop. We can go to here and then go through the gateway to Talos, and we'll be right at the train station and head over to Bricks. I don't know if that was a lot faster because of all the zone loads, but it was less annoying than hopping all the way through Peregrine Island, so here we are. So let's talk to Steve Sheridan. I do have a role-playing game topic to talk about. It's came as usual from D&D, but in the D&D forums, but it easily applies to this game and any other role-playing game, which we'll get to. But let's talk to Steve Sheridan first, get inside a mission, and then we'll start talking about it. So let's go talk to Sheridan. I just love hopping across rooftops. Super jump, my favorite power in the entire game. So much fun. As much as I like flight, because it's such a superhero-y power, and if I were in the real world, like, if you could have superpowers, I would want flight, not super jump. But in the game, super jump is super fun. I've examined the Portal Corp scientists, and even I was amazed at the findings. Quintessence lass, I believe that you actually only saved half the scientists, not half their number, but half of each person. Allow me to explain. When you first went looking for the scientists, you found only a dimensional rupture. What's my belief that this rupture actually fractured the scientists, splitting them into two people. One half got sent to the devouring Earth's world. The other half still lost somewhere in the multiverse, so now we're going to have to look for them. So let's call Unai, and we tell him what happened. And he says, so Steve Sheridan thinks the portal scientists were torn in two, and one half is still out there somewhere. I guess that explains the sketchy data we got. We think we know where the other half is. Will you go rescue them? Yes, I absolutely will go rescue them. And now we go back to Peregrine Island. So let's do our mission teleporter, because I think the next mission will probably also be through the portal. So once we port there, we shouldn't need to port around the map after this. I might be wrong, because I only somewhat remember this story arc from 8 months ago or whatever. But I think I'm right. So we'll head on through, and we need to find the scientists' other halves. Alright, so this is going to be an outdoor mission. So we want to delineate the edges, and then we'll find the scientists. So as we go, let me discuss the role-playing game topic that I wanted to talk about. So this started in a thread in the D&D Beyond forum where they're asking for game masters are talking to each other about what do you have any house rules on criticals? So in many games, if you roll the maximum number on dice, usually to hit or maybe for a skill check, you get an automatic hit that does extra damage. And you can see that it doesn't work quite the same way in City of Heroes, but in Scrappers you can do critical hits as well. It doubles the damage. In Dungeons and Dragons, if you roll a natural 20 on your 20-sided die when you're attacking someone, no matter what their armor class and what your chance to hit was, the natural 20 automatically hits and automatically does double the dice of damage. So if you're rolling an 8-sided die for damage with your sword, you roll 2 8-sided dice. Now, what some people do, kind of to customize it, is they'll say you do double damage. So whatever you roll on your 8-sided die, and there is a prisoner, you double it. So if I roll a 4, I call it 8. If I roll an 8, it's called 16, and so forth. And so um, there are, and then if you roll a natural 1, it is an automatic miss. And that's really all the rules call for in Dungeons and Dragons. Sometimes people use an optional rule, such as if you roll a critical failure, you get some sort of a fumble. Rollmaster actually has this, a fumble table, where you can like chop your own toe off because you did so badly. Um, there are critical failures in Savage Worlds as well. Some people also, either because they misinterpret it or because they have house rules, use getting a 20 on a skill check in Dungeons and Dragons, because you use the 20-sided dice to check to see if you succeed at skills as well as to hit. They regard that an automatic or critical skill success, and a natural 1 would be a critical skill failure. And so that's an option that people were talking about. And then somebody was saying that when they get a critical, not only do they do double dice, but the DM says you get maximum rolls on the dice. So if you're rolling an 8, if you have a 1 die 8 sword, right, which is going to generate random numbers uniformly from 1 to 8, and you crit it, you would not just do 2d8 or 1d8 times 2, but you would actually do automatically 16 damage. And so people were talking about these different crit options. That's really not the topic, though. In this thread, somebody said something like, when the DM told him you automatically get max damage on your dice, he said to the DM, that's probably a mistake. You shouldn't do that. And the DM's like, no, that's how we play in his group. And he was like, okay. And he had this, and I don't know the exact rules of how this works, but he had this, a warlock who was a hexblade, I think, and somehow has an ability to, I don't know, do a lot of damage. And when it was maximized, he ended up being able to do like over 100 damage in a single hit, and pretty much reliably. Like, I guess if he got the crit, now you still have to get a critical. So then he pointed out that there are certain abilities, like some abilities paladins and these hexblades have, that are just going to make that kind of a crit rule incredibly powerful for them, more so than for anybody else. And what he then said was, yeah, the DM will hate it, the other players will hate it, but paladins and hexblade warlocks players will love it, right? And I thought about this. Why do they love it? They love it because they're overpowered. They love it because they're doing way more damage than everybody else. They love it because it breaks the game. Well, I guess I'm strange, but I don't think a good player a reasonable player would be glad that they're doing something with their character that's breaking the game, that's making the game not be fun for the DM, not be fun for the other players, hard for the DM to run, harder for the DM to balance. If you know this thing is unbalanced, why are you glad? Right? Now, I'm not going to say you should deliberately weaken your character, right? I don't think that's necessarily logical, right? I don't know that makes sense to say that, well, I know that doing this attack would be overpowered, so I'm not going to have my character do their most powerful attack. I don't think that makes sense, right? And I would never ask a player to do that. Rather, what I would say is, as a player, you should not be glad that this thing is overpowered and or broken, right? And you should, this player did the right thing initially and said, you shouldn't do this, it'll break the game. And then I think to teach the DM a lesson, because the DM was like, no, it's cool. He said, okay, fine, I'm going to do this ridiculous thing and do 140 damage in a single blow, and maybe the DM will see that this is overpowered. But a good player doesn't want to be overpowered and doesn't want to overshadow the rest of the party A smart player, even if they're not like altruistic, should be smart enough to know that that is doomed to failure. So, I mean, there are sort of two issues here. As a good player, I would argue a good player doesn't want this because it's not good to overshadow other people and to make the DM's life miserable. And a good player shouldn't want to do those things. But even if you're, let's say, not a good player in the sense that you don't care if you're making the DM's life miserable in the abstract, like I don't care if he doesn't like it, right? The reason you should care about whether he likes it or not is because if you make the DM's life miserable, as I've said many times on this channel, your campaign is going to end. Because the DM isn't going to want to keep DMing. DMing is a lot of work. It's stressful in many ways. It can be fun, but it's also a lot more work than being a player. And if you're going to make the DM's life miserable over and over again by doing these overpowered things, then you're going to lose that DM and you won't be playing D&D anymore. So assuming you like playing D&D, you shouldn't be purposely trying to do things that break the game. And you shouldn't be glad that you're doing things that break the game. You shouldn't like that you're doing something to break the game. You shouldn't like that something is making you overpowered because it breaks the game. And if you like the game, you shouldn't be trying to break it. And I don't know, maybe I'm just too idealistic. I know a lot of players seem to get off on being overpowered, and I don't know why, and I think I'll never understand why, right? Because I like a good challenge, right? So when this character gets more powerful, I bump things up to +2 or +3 because I want the game to be challenging. I don't want her to be overpowered. And so I'm not going to like purposely weaken my build to weaken her, right? Like say not put enhancements on my slots. That's ridiculous. Then enhancements are meant to be used. It's part of the game. But I'm also not going to just try and do all this enhancing and then play it on +0 because that essentially breaks the game. Now, I don't know where these last two scientists are. And I guess guys are going to have to go through the old tried and true, which is to just attack everybody until one of my random targeting clicks gets me to the hostages. And I'm going to start over here because I feel like I may have missed somebody over here. So I'm just going to start in this area and we'll just keep moving. And when I'm done saying my piece, then I'll pause it because I don't think you need to watch me vainly going around this entire area until I find the one or two needles in a haystack. So yeah, I would say, yeah, if you are a good player of a game, you should not want to cheat. You should not want to have unfair advantages, right? I remember when I was a kid, this isn't D&D now, it's chess, but I joined the chess team. My mother was always pushing me to do extracurricular activities. I didn't want to do athletics. I was not into athletics. I was not a jock. I was a nerd. So being a nerd, I wanted to be on the chess team if I was going to do something, extracurricular. And I had a friend who was on the chess team, and it was both a team and a club. Anybody could go play chess, but only certain people were able to be on the team, and you had to be good enough. And I was the number, I guess, 4 or 5 player, number 5. We called them boards, so I was board 5. Board 1 was the best guy. Actually, board 2 was our best guy. Board 1 was the Russian kid who thought he was the best guy and was willing to play on board 1 because he had a big ego, and because he was Russian and he thought, I'm Russian, therefore I'm good at chess. My really good friend, who I've said is the best GM I've ever had, he was board 2. My friend who is still playing D&D with me was board 3. Another guy was board 4, really good friend of mine, and then I was board 5. And so I was playing against the 5th best players of the other schools, and I actually like this a lot because I wasn't that great at chess, but I was pretty good at it, and a lot of schools did not have 5 good players, whereas we didn't have a lot of great players. Nobody was really strong enough to be board 1 or board 2, and the 2 guys who did it had a lot of losses. We were all pretty equal to each other, but because of that, we had like 6 or 7 people, all of whom were good enough to be on the team. And so our boards 2 and 3 our boards 1 and 2 didn't do that great, but boards 3, 4, and 5 did really well. So in the very first game, we were playing against a local high school. This was in high school. I was in 11th grade. And when you play chess competitively, you have a clock. And you have to write down your moves as a record so that if there's any dispute, you can verify what happened. And the white player's clock is started by the black player. And you have 2 clocks, one for each player, and only one of them advances at a time. So as the black player, I clicked and I started the white player's clock, and he was supposed to make his move and then hit his clock, which would then start my clock going. Then I would make a move, hit my clock, it would start his clock going. So on the very first or second move of the game, and there's one guy left to find, on the very first or second move of the game, I can't remember which, but very early, the other player went and forgot to hit his clock. Now, you have to make 40 moves in an hour, right? And it sounds like that's a lot of time, and it is. But one of the things that you learn very early, and this was my first competitive match, actually, but I had practiced playing chess with my friends timed. And one of the things you learn early is you memorize a lot of these opening moves. You learn the first maybe 10 moves of a given opening, like I was playing the Sicilian defense or something. And I know the first 10 or so moves. And so this kid moves his queen's pawn or whatever, and I went right into, or whatever defense it was. He moved his king pawn, and I did the Sicilian defense. First move of the Sicilian defense is to move the knight. And I hit my clock, and his clock started. And what you try to do is you try to get those 10 moves really quickly. Move, and bam, hit your clock. Because then that leaves a lot of time for you to do the later moves. So you can get 10 moves done in 3 or 4 minutes. Then you have 55 minutes or 56 minutes to do the remaining 30 moves. It gives you a lot more time. And consequently, you don't want to waste a lot of time on the first couple moves. So here we are on the second move, maybe the third move, something like that, very early in the game. And he made his move and he forgot to hit his clock. So I just sat there. And I knew what I was going to do next, but I just sat there. And I sat there. And literally, guys, if I had sat there for an hour, that kid's clock would have run out, and he would have lost the game in 3 moves, right? So I sat there for a little while. I sat there for a minute or 2 minutes. After about 5 minutes had gone by, I thought, okay, I don't want to win that way. I want to actually play against this kid. And it turned out he was very inexperienced, and he wasn't going to beat me anyway. He made a lot of mistakes, and he lost his queen really early and so on. But what I did was I made my move, and then you're not really supposed to talk unless you say check to check the king. You're really not supposed to talk. But what I did was I made my move, and then when I went to hit my clock, I went, oh, like that, to let him know he had not hit his clock. Don't think he picked up on it. So then he made another move, and he didn't hit his clock. And again, I waited a few minutes, and then I moved, and I went to hit the clock, and I was like, oh. And I did this a few times. Eventually, he realized he was supposed to hit his clock, and he started doing it. At that point, he was 6 or 7 moves into the game and had lost 30 minutes. And I felt bad for him. I was trying to kind of help him out without really helping him because I was trying to defeat him. But my point is, I didn't want to win in this stupid way, right? Oh, well, he just... I mean, it's one thing if somebody runs out of time. My best friend always took a lot of time, and a lot of times he was beating me on the board, and his time would run out, and he'd lose 36 moves into the game because he didn't have enough time to finish. And he's up a queen and 2 rooks and a knight, and he's got me 4 moves from checkmate, but he runs out of time That used to happen. And the coach of the chess team used to yell at me like, "Don't do that. You should beat him for real." And I'm like, "No, this is part of the game. You've got to do the certain moves in a certain period of time." And he said, "Yeah, but I want you to know how to checkmate somebody." Right? He had a point. But anyway, getting back to this story, I didn't want to be, shall we say, OP, right? I wanted to beat the kid fair and square in an actual chess game. Now, it turns out, as I said, he wasn't very strong as a player. He didn't remember that one of the rules in chess, which is that if you touch a piece, you have to move it. So he touched a piece, picked it up, let it go, went to move another piece, and I said, "Excuse me, but touch move." And he said, "What?" And I said, "You touched that piece." And so then his coach came over and said, "What's the problem?" And I said, "Well, he touched that piece." And the coach just kind of shook his head and said, "You got to move it." He said, "You have to." And that, like, his queen was under threat, I think. He didn't see the queen was under threat at first, and so he was trying to move a knight or something. And then he realized that I had like threatened his queen, and I was going to take his queen. So then he wanted to move the queen, and like, no, you can't do that, right? And I kind of felt bad about that too. I had a long talk with the friend of mine that was the great GM. I had a long talk with him afterwards about, like, was I mean to do that? And he said, "Well, no. I mean, that's the way the game is played, But I didn't want to really win that way, right? I wanted to win by beating him on the board. Now, it turned out, again, by the end of that match, it was pretty clear that whether he touched the piece or not, he wasn't going to win that match, because by the end of the game, he was down to like a pawn and a king, and I had like all my pieces still on the board, and like he was just really easy to beat, and obviously wasn't really ready. He was very young. I think he was a freshman in high school, like first couple months of high school, and it may have been the first time he ever played a serious chess game. And what are you going to do? That's the competition, and that's who I had to play against. But I guess my point is, I was trying to help him be competitive so that we could have a good game, right? I didn't want him to win, but I also didn't want it to be a walkover. And I had been looking forward to this. I'd never really actually played in competition up to that point, and so I wanted to have a good competitive game. I didn't want him to lose on time. I didn't really want him to lose because he touched a piece either, And so, yes, there's sort of this balancing act of just how much do I enforce the rules versus, how much, leeway I try to give him. And I was also aware, by the way, I was playing for a team, right? And I couldn't afford to let my sense of honor or whatever cost the team a game, right? This wasn't an individual match. If I were in an individual tournament, maybe I wouldn't have asked him to move the piece, right? Because it just affects me. But because it was going to affect the whole team, and actually our number one guy lost his match, I couldn't afford to be so nice that I gave up a game for my board when I needed to be one of our wins, right? And I didn't, what I was doing was justified. And it would have been justified for me to just let his clock run out. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is, like, do you want to play chess or do you just want to win? And I wanted to play chess. I didn't just want to win. Right? Winning is great, feels a lot better than losing, but I'd rather lose a really good match than win a match that I didn't actually really win because the other guy's clock ran out or something like that. And I always remember when I was in 8th grade, much earlier than this, there was this kid who was really good at chess, and we had a chess club, and the teacher of the chess club, he was pretty cool, and he organized tournaments. And so what he did was he would set up like a tournament and like brackets, and I think I lost one game, and the other kid was undefeated, and nobody could beat him. He was just so good. And so then we had like a championship match, and it was best 2 out of 3 games. And he beat me the first game, And then, like, the next period we came back, the next club period we came back, and I beat him the second game. And then we had our third game was super tough, and he beat me, but barely. And so here's my point. Nobody else could touch this kid. He just crushed everybody else. I was the only person who took a game off him, and I almost drew him the second time, right? So it was a very, very close. That kid always would say to me, "You want to play chess?" He wanted to play me. Now, why? He might lose to me. He couldn't lose to anybody else. That's why. Because I gave him a challenge. And he wanted to play chess. He didn't just want to crush everybody. He was fool's mating people and stuff because they didn't know how to play. And, like, yeah, you can do that. Fool's mate is a mate in 3 moves. Scholar's mate in 6 moves. There are other mates like that where you finish the game in 3 or 6 moves. Who wants to play chess like that? Right? That's just, well, first of all, kind of bullying the other person. But it's certainly not hard. It's not a good match. Right? It's not a good chess game. So, it's the same thing with D&D. Who wants to play D&D like that, where your character does 140 points of damage against goblins and they all die? Well, okay. Should we all just pack up and go home? Like, why even play? Right? And why make the DM have to deal with your 140 points of damage? Now, again, I'm not saying that the player should say, I'm not going to crit. I mean, you know, that's the crit rules are the crit rules. But to say I'm happy about it, I'm happy that my character is this overpowered thing that's just crushing everybody. Or me to say I'm happy about the fact that this guy let his clock run out and touched the wrong piece and had to move it and lost the game because of it. You know, you've got to sometimes do what you've got to do when you're playing, especially competitively, and even in a role-playing game. You know, you play by the rules. If that's the rule the DM said he wants to play with and you advise him against it and he plays with it anyway, okay. You play it. You don't necessarily not. But you shouldn't be gleeful about it. To be like cackling with glee, oh good, my character is so overpowered, they're going to do enough damage to like wipe an entire room of orcs at first level. You shouldn't be happy about that. I mean, I know that in the moment it can feel pretty awesome and yeah, we defeated them all. But if you're actually just steamrolling over and over again because your character is overpowered and you're stealing the spotlight and you're, you know, hogging the attention from everybody else, you shouldn't be glad about that. You shouldn't be happy about it. You shouldn't be cheering that. Because if you're ruining the experience for other people, as I've tried to say many times on this channel, you're not going to have a game. Sooner or later, some of those other people at the table are going to realize the old Matt Colville adage that no D&D is better than bad D&D, and you're giving them bad D&D, and they're going to stop playing with you. Right? So the thing is, you have to make sure that you're not the person causing it to be bad D&D, or else you're going to no longer have D&D. Right? Everybody is going to stop playing with you, or just stop playing at all. The GM's going to say, I don't need this crap, and he's just going to stop. Right? So you don't want to be overpowered. You really don't. You might think you do, but you don't. And it's the same thing here. And I've mentioned this before on this channel, that most of my friends from the return of City of Heroes, both on Homecoming and in terms of Rebirth, most of my friends, most of my former guildmates do not play City of Heroes anymore. The 2 guild leaders that ran my guild don't play City of Heroes anymore, as far as I know. Guild leaders, usually these are the most gung-ho people about a game. They stop playing. Most of the guild admins stop playing. Most of the guild players don't play anymore. There were probably close to 100 people in my guild when things were at their height, a year and a half or something ago. 100 players, my guess is maybe 10 of them are still playing City of Heroes. 90% of my friends have quit playing this game completely. Why do you think that is? Because they were ridiculous, overpowered, billion influence builds that were doing +4 × 8, and it wasn't even making them break a sweat. Soloing it. The only thing that could challenge them maybe was the Incarnate Trials. They could go into task forces meant for 8 people at +4 and solo them. Solo them! There's no challenge. They got bored. They don't play anymore. Right? This is the risk of being overpowered. You shouldn't be glad to be so ridiculously overpowered that you can go in there and solo the Incarnate Trials. Because then, what are you going to do? The game is boring, and you're going to stop playing. Right? Whereas, meanwhile, I've only done sort of modest building, right? Just generalized invention enhancers for the most part. What does this character have? 3 sets? 4, right? Total at level 47. I don't go in for all that uberness, and I'm still having fun, right? Because I've managed to control myself, and instead of cackling with glee and going in and owning +4 times 8 task forces and trials, I'm playing +3 missions on story arcs, and it's still fun. Now, I'm not saying that any of those is necessarily the wrong way to play, but what I am saying is you have to be careful about being glad about being overpowered, because oftentimes it's not so great, and it can lead to a lack of enjoyment on your part of the game, and it will almost certainly lead to a lack of enjoyment of the other players in the game. And once other people aren't playing the game, they will stop playing, and once you're not enjoying the game, you're going to stop playing. So you got to be very careful about this, guys. It's a really easy way to ruin a game. So no, the Paladin and the Hexblade shouldn't have been happy about the overpowered way that criticals were working, because it was unbalancing the game. And a good player shouldn't be happy to have the game be unbalanced. A good player should want the game to be fair and balanced and even for everybody, and fun for the GM to make up stories for, so that there's a longevity to it. Unfortunately, my players aren't like this. Our campaign has been going for 15 months now, if you count like session 0. 15 months, every other week like clockwork. And it's given, hopefully, all of them, and certainly me, a lot of pleasure. And it's been able to do that because everybody's having fun, and everybody's making sure they're not doing things to crush the fun of other people. So you should never be glad that something is making you more powerful than everybody else and potentially ruining the experience of the other players at the table. Right? Again, I'm not saying that you shouldn't do what the rules say your character can do, but you certainly shouldn't be glad to have a rules interpretation that makes your character overpowered. So that's my rant about that, guys. I'm going to pause it here, and when we find the next and final kidnap victim, I will bring you back. Alright, I have found the last person, and it's right down there. I'll show you in a sec. So right down at the distance there, if you can see it. So we're going to defeat these guys and then go down and rescue them. And then we will be done with this mission. I really wish they had done these missions some other way, because they're incredibly tedious. And I was looking underneath these buildings, but I just must have missed this corner. It's so easy to miss these things because there are so many similar looking ones. Out we go. Okay, folks, that's 34 minutes. So I think we're going to stop there. We will talk to Unai, who says, "Good work, Quintessence lass. You've rescued the other halves. Now all you have to do is figure out how to rejoin them." But that will happen in our next episode. We're 3 beads away from level 48, so we're moving very quickly here, guys. Until next time, I am Scrapperlock, and this has been City of Heroes on the Rebirth server.